in just one snap of a finger or in a minute or a second. So we need to move fast, and we do not have the wherewithal to move fast today. This is what we are facing. A lot of the other cases all of you are familiar with. But let me just highlight one of them, which is the latest trend, which is, in a way, it's a kind of cyberbullying which has been prevalent all through. Invariably, it used to be a jilted lover instance earlier. One of our earliest convictions in the Suhas Katti case was to that effect. Now what do you have? School children are going online and morphing pictures, putting up pornographic content because they have a grouse against their classmates, they have cudgels, they have to pick up cudgels against teachers. Now there is no restriction or bar to who can be a victim today. And everybody is a victim, and merely setting up local servers alone cannot be an answer, though it could definitely give at least effective remedies. Could this be averted merely with awareness programs? Could we not avert it by putting some fear? Because 90% of these perpetrators are not persons who would commit these wrongs if they knew the seriousness of it. Today we are sitting here talking about the chairman and managing director of a bank having committed several instances of fraud, and what do we see? 10 convictions later, he gets a 1-year sentence and a 1.5 lakh fine for committing an offence which has resulted in loss of a few crores. How is it going to deter somebody? Because at the end of the conviction, what happens? His sentence is suspended, appeal is permitted to be filed, and bail is granted. He's 77 years old. He is not going to see the inside of a cell at this rate. Where is the deterrence then? Is law or the provisions or the punishment under it sufficient to deter somebody from committing these kind of crimes? I think this is something we need to not only introspect but discuss and debate and bring about changes in. This is again a telling instance of how efficacious our provisions are being, and this is from the perspective of the executive. Because when we talk about enforcement of your rights, you would technically look at it from a couple of aspects, or three I would put it. Two parts of the executive action. One, they have given you the CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team, which is primary, which had as its role protection of national security. Then you have the police machinery, which again falls within the executive, which is to protect as an individual, your rights, etc. Not necessarily only individuals, but technically that becomes the focus there. And then you have your judiciary, which has to then take it to the next level. How far have we come with all these legs of, enforcement? Yeah. Please just give me a heads up when I run out of time. Now, what do they say? You have CERT put in place to take care of cyber security, and what has it resulted in? 23 cases have moved on to 13,000 cases in a year's time. And this is not just for that period, and this is again only reported instances. We do not know how many more have been there. The answer to that, 2 organizations have been put in place instead of 1. One is CERT and the other is, you have it, the one. Yeah, NCIIDC. Now, how is it going to help us? You know, the answers which you have got. And Justice Banimit had mentioned in his inaugural address about the loss of trillions of dollars due to virus attacks in 2000 and prior thereto. And what was it that the law provided for us? Virus attacks were not a criminal offense under the original Information Technology Act. We had to wait for nearly 9 years for it to be made into an offense. Why 9? Because 2008 is when the amendments were brought in and 2009 was when they were notified. How effective are they in terms of its enforcement? Practically speaking, as a practicing lawyer, I can tell you, very ineffective. Let it be a case of data theft, let it be a case of, morphing, pornography, personal attacks on individuals, the law moves at snail's pace or even slower, if at all. So, when we are talking about, you know, creating awareness, when we are talking about putting together security systems, unless a system is effective, it doesn't exist. But is it the system to be blamed, or is it the enforcement of the system that is to be blamed? Because we can't always blame a process, it has to be the implementation of the process that has to be then streamlined. This is just a very quick overview of what the Information Technology Act provides. So, where do we stand with all these provisions that have been put in place? We have cyber terrorism, provision for cyber terrorism, which obviously was the reason why the 2008 amendments were quickly rushed through. While within a month of the Mumbai attacks, these were the amendments were put together and rushed through. It's not like the amendments were all put together only then. They had been hibernating from 2005. Changes were suggested in 2006. Nothing happens thereafter. And without much thought, without much debate, and putting together things, a lot of us, Navi would know and remember the discussions we have had, for instance, about Section 66 and its horrendous misuse. It still is put in place and rushed through. Why? Because they wanted this one provision about cyber terrorism. Where has the law gone wrong with the legislators? That's the third leg we need to probably look at when we are looking at broader issues and policy issues. You cannot cover just about every possible contingency in one section. When you try to do that, and especially with criminal provisions, you're opening something out for interpretation. And criminal provisions cannot be open for interpretation in its application. It has to be strict liability, and strict liability necessarily mandates that what you are asking somebody not to do is very clear. You know, if you say thou shalt not steal, the world knows what they should not do. If you say thou shalt not alter, delete, destroy any computer data residing in a computer resource, or aid or abet somebody in doing that, or reduce its value, or diminish its utility, or cause loss to somebody, then you have committed some offense. Who is going to know that? Who is going to know what is the act that he is doing that is supposed to be an offense? You know, the deterrent aspect of a criminal enactment is therefore lost in translation literally over there. So this is what you have. You have to read 66F to see, you know, what more could cause fear in your mind and give you more sleepless nights. It is so open-ended, so broad-based. Why? The enforcement agencies wanted as much leeway as possible. That cannot be. And that is the same malady that has affected every other provision which has been introduced, which I think all of you all have heard plenty about, like say 66A. One would think when, you know, a very general reading of 66A is done, that it is meant to address, let's say, a hoax call. What else has it given? A kind of broad-based public-private partnership of a different sort you have with the provisions for encryption and, you know, decryption, monitoring, obstruction, etc. of encrypted data. Now, the onus that has been placed on intermediaries is fairly high. It's fairly high. They have on one hand introduced a leeway for them under 79 by saying if you have exercised due diligence and care and caution and security practices, you're not liable. Given them a bit of a harbor also by saying that if some violation has been brought to your notice and if you have acted on it, then you're not liable. You're not liable for data that you have not hosted. It's third-party data, etc. But at the end of it all, there is a penalty that attaches to you not cooperating with the government agencies. To what extent of cooperation, at what level does it become a penalty, at what level can you be punished for it? That is still again open-ended. Anything that is open-ended can only lead to abuse then. So this is where you stand with respect to encryption. There's a lot that can be said about encryption, but that's not the topic for discussion today, so I'll be moving on. You have for economic security, 43A and 72A. Everybody thought, okay, so we have some data protection laws in place. But what do you have? It is meant to protect sensitive personal information as far as 43A is concerned, and personal information as far as 72A is concerned. 43A is a civil penalty and 72A is a criminal liability. And you have further provisions for protecting you against pornographic content with 67, 67A and B. I'm going to quickly rush through. Some case studies were there, but we can definitely skip through them. I'm going to go right down to the last slide on this. Just a few questions I'd like to leave you all with. Can one size fit all? Can you just say, okay, let's make it one big, melee of jumble of words put together and say that this is supposed to cover every possible crime or offense that can be committed, and say this is to apply to, let's say, defamation in print as opposed to, let's say, a mocked picture which really affects a person's, very being. So can that be the way you can look at law? Can you really start exercising? I mean, there are innumerable things that have been said about the various provisions that have come into place and that they are intending to put in place, including UID, which Dr. Kelkar will be addressing, about how far is it going to infringe on our fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. We should not forget that we are a democracy and we cannot be made to forego our rights, not just through legislation but also out of fear of reprisal. Can the phone tapping instances, look at the number of instances that you have. Are you going to give them an open-ended mandate to say, oh, go ahead and do what you want, notice and misuse the data? Where is the protection for data that is being collected in this manner? Are the amendments going to always be, or is legislation always going to be a knee-jerk reaction? Or are we going to have a very peacefully debated and discussed and drafted enactment? Where do we stand today? How far are the provisions or its implementation helping us? Where are we going to go, especially as personals or individuals, with respect to personal security? When you want to enforce it, believe me, it's a nightmare and it invariably barely happens. Nations can still take care of themselves. Industry can still to some extent take care of itself. Individuals are the ones who are left in the lurch, and where do we stand on that? Thank you.
I think her session, her presentation really sort of set the stage for all the other presentations that we'll be listening to for the rest of the day today. She has, of course, brought up some very, very important questions which the panelists were also discussing before we had come here for our presentations. And in particular, I think Ms. Napane sort of highlighted one very, very important aspect, which is you can have a law, but then what is the point if the sentence doesn't match the offense that you've committed? And then second off, what's the point of having a law when you don't ensure proper implementation? And all of us have seen several instances of misuse, especially when it comes to something like Section 66A of the IT Act, where you've started off with one provision with a particular objective, and then what you see instead is something that sort of transcends any kind of reasonable explanation you might have for it. So now that we've sort of encountered and raised some important questions, I think I'm going to hand over the session to Mr. Navi, who hopefully will be able to give us a few answers. Come here to help Mr. Navi with his presentation on this matter.
Relevance and importance at this point of time. Of course, I am looking at the national cyber space security in a broader perspective, just to give some of my thoughts on the current status, challenges, and obviously whether we have a solution. See, without talking of a solution, I feel that all the debates are meaningless. So we need to look at that. As other speakers also have pointed out, I also look at this cyber security scenario from a different perspective. I'm looking at it from who is, when we talk of security, who is responsible for the security? Obviously, it is the persons who are in charge of the assets which are to be secured. So, in that perspective, I'm looking at the critical assets controlled by the government. There is a security perspective. And that is where we have these issues of interception, surveillance, the privacy, and other things. So when I say asset, it is not merely the physical assets or like computers. We are also talking of information inside the computer. And that may physically reside in a server in India, it may reside physically anywhere in the world. Right? It is not a matter of concern at all. In fact, our law does not base the decisions on the basis of a computer. The entire Information Technology Act is a law about information residing inside a computer. It is incidental that computer is involved, but the real focus of the law is information. And if the information is lying in USA, still it is an object on which legal action can be sought in India. So our law is something which is flexible enough to bring down the information wherever it is residing into the Indian cyberspace, which is whatever you are viewing. An electronic document which you are viewing sitting from this room is an asset in India. And if it is an offensive asset, there is the appropriate law of the land which applies. In fact, in the Suhas Katti case, if you remember, the offensive message was lying in Yahoo message group. Okay. And the objection was that that message is offensive, it is obscene, comes under section 67, whatever was it. But the fact was that the message was lying in USA, in some server. I don't know where the Yahoo server was at that point of time. But a magistrate's court in Chennai took cognizance of this offense and the damage it caused to a physical person in Chennai and provided 5 years imprisonment to the culprit. How was it possible? That is the strength of our law. In fact, that was the law of IDA 2000, not even 2008. So we have to recognize that we are looking at information more than the computers. And in that, one set of information is controlled by the government. We can call it as critical assets because if something goes wrong, the nation gets affected. The second set of assets is the corporate assets. Now, it is here that we talk more of data security issues because, and also espionage and that kind of a thing. So, when we talk of assets owned and controlled by corporates, then we have the data security issues. The third is assets controlled by citizens of the country. We all have our own information and some assets which we ourselves control. That is where some of these cyber crimes come. But sometimes what happens, we don't control all our assets ourselves. We hand it over to an intermediary. Like a bank. Bank is an institution. A website is an institution. We hand over our sensitive personal information to the custody of an intermediary. And if he does not secure, the damage is more on the individual rather than on the intermediary. So this is one class of assets which is citizen-owned assets. We are responsible for the security, and since we cannot always handle the services around this, we hand it over to another intermediary, and this, if the intermediary is a company, you can call it as a data security issue. But if it is an individual, we have other issues like, do I have a good antivirus product in my laptop? It is an individual. See, there are millions of users. You have to ask each one of those users, do I have a good antivirus product? Is it updated as of today morning? Okay, and if it is updated, have you updated it with such a product which doesn't have a 0-day vulnerability? So these are the questions we ask an individual. Whenever a bank fraud happens, many times bankers ask the customer, did you not know that this is called phishing? Now until yesterday the bank manager did not know what was phishing. Today he is asking the customer, why did you not know what was phishing? Okay, and say that you should have taken care. Who knows that the Trojan can be there in my computer when I am not looking at even the bank side, I am looking at IPL website and a Trojan comes into my computer and that Trojan steals my bank data. How can you make a person aware that you should not go to an IPL website? If you go to an IPL website, you will get bank keylogger or something like that. So people, when you are talking of individuals, we should have a security system which factors in the possibility of ignorance and impossibility of securing at the individual assets. So when we talk of national security scenario, we have to see that there are certain issues where we as people who say that IT is the best for the country, we are also responsible for making it secure. If we don't make it secure, we have no business to introduce IT which is insecure and it will actually create more damages to the society than what it is. I'm sure Samir and others will talk about the Aadhaar card. So we are all pushing Aadhaar card as if that is a solution for everything, but we have not looked at the possibility of Aadhaar being misused and all of us tomorrow losing our personal identity itself. Now what are the threats these security people need to look at? See, these individuals who are attacking for fun or personal vengeance, they all attack individual information assets like this morphing, etc., etc. Now certain cyber crimes like stalking, bullying, obscenity, they come under that group of threats. Okay. Now the second is attacks on companies which sometimes are for espionage purposes, which means there is a rival company which is very much interested in attacking a particular company. So there we come across the group of cyber crimes which are hacking, data theft, denial of service, etc. Then attacks on national assets, the threats are in the form of what we generally call as cyber terrorism and cyber wars. Cyber terrorism is something which terrorizes a community. A group of people who feel that I should not touch the computer, then you have terrorized them effectively. And that is the effect of cyber terrorism, apart from attacking the government sites. And of course, cyber wars, you have heard Napanai speak of the various things. But today what we are also worried about is a sort of a hybrid threat. That is, something which originates as an individual crime, but the effect is on the community. I will give you one of these examples, okay? Let us look at, we'll come to this, let us look at this 250 crore bank fraud which happened recently. At one level you say, what happened? The credit card information of 12 people was stolen. Okay, ultimately you can say it's a cyber crime against those 12 people. But what happened? These 12 people's credit card information was used 40,000 times for withdrawing money from the ATMs, and these 40,000 transactions took place once in December in 2.5 hours, certain 3,600 transactions, and in March the balance 36,000 transactions in about 8-10 hours. all happened in 27 different countries. One set of things happened